Out with the old, in with the new. For many people, the new ideas and things are better. And yet, we get even more excited when we find something old. An old sweatshirt, photographs, or mementos. Nostalgia is a powerful thing for sure, but because it ties a thing to a feeling, an event, or a person, are we as people as moved when it comes to hearing wisdom and ideas that come from a generation before, a couple generations before, especially when it's coming from the voice of somebody who has the experience of age? Think about this as we discuss the ageless wisdom of grandparents today on Curiosity Continuum.
Thank you for joining us today on Curiosity Continuum. For those of you tuning in the first time, thank you. And Curiosity Continuum is a podcast and movement started by two lifelong friends, Brian and myself, who want to share conversations with you that explore, examine, and reframe common, practical topics that spark your curiosity, help you integrate information, and enhance your everyday contextual awareness in a constantly changing world.
You can find us on www.curiositycontinuum.com. There you can find the links to listen to us on your favorite podcasting platforms and follow us on social media. You can also submit a question directly on the website or comment to the podcast. Josh and I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and on that note too, we want you to also rate our podcast on whatever service that you're listening it to. Like us on Facebook if you do like us, so you can get our information, or on our other socials, so you can actually keep in contact with us that way too.
Absolutely. Today's topic is the ageless wisdom of grandparents. And really, when we think about what, a couple generations older would say to us, sometimes, especially now in a world that has been so inflected up with certain types of progress by technology, we find that we may be in some ways relegating, well, that was the old world, that doesn't apply anymore. But really, there's a lot of timeless wisdom because of age and life stage that grandparents or people older than us have gained through just the course of life, and they absolutely apply today. So today what we want to do is just pull some of those things from our own personal experience, and hopefully this will kind of spark your own memory to say, what did I learn from somebody older than me?
I'm going to start with a story anyway, and I know Brian's got a couple stories too. So I had two sets of grandparents, like most people. We all do have two sets of grandparents, but that they lived very different lives. I had one set of grandparents that lived out in the country, and they owned a lumber mill in northern Michigan. And then I had the other set of grandparents lived in the same city, but they lived, we would call it in town, lived in the city. So it was very interesting, and they lived very different lives. My grandfather lived out in the woods. He loved working for himself. He very rarely went into town. He always sent my uncle to go get him stuff. And my grandmother bought food once a week. She went on Thursdays. It was her in-town day. And they had plenty of food to last more than a week, mind you. But that was, I think, more of her from getting out so she didn't go squirrel crazy 17 miles out of town on a dead-end road.
That matters. It really matters, When I think about my grandparents, I think the two that are coming to mind right now that I'll share a little bit about today. One was my mom's parents. So those were the grandparents that I had the most contact with, especially in my younger years, even though I lived a little bit further away. My grandpa was a farmer, a carpenter, a millwright, and he was always really good at making things work. He was somebody that I believe dropped out of high school in the 9th grade or something like that. And so he was somebody that just started to make his way in the world and, lived through the Depression and all different kinds of things. And he made a good living by a lot of hard work and sweat of his brow. And my mom was one of 3 daughters that helped Grandpa on the farm and everything like that. And the other set, obviously my dad had parents as well. I knew them a little bit less just by life flow and everything like that. The other grandparents I'm going to drag into this conversation are going to be Sabrina's grandparents. So this is her dad's parents, and they were longtime farmers. They were married 73 years. So when they passed away, they were 95 and 93, and Grandma passed 3 months to the day to what Grandpa did. It's kind of, sometimes those things time out that way. It's kind of interesting always. He was part of the greatest generation, and they lived a good, long, rich life. And so those are the two grandparents I'm kind of referencing today a little bit, just because of the things that we learned from them and what my wife learned from her grandparents being a constant influence in her life. So the story I want to share with you guys to start is my Grandma Johnson. So this is my mom's mom. And so my mom's parents were farmers, and my grandpa was a carpenter and a millwright. So after he stopped farming, he kind of went and did other things like construction and stuff. Was always very, very smart at making things work or building things in a quality way that would last. The story, though, about my grandma is something that always embarrassed my mom, and it was where she would wash plastic bags. Now, this is the generation that went through the Depression, and so you learned like what you really need, what you don't need, and how to make something last again and again. This was in the age of Ziploc bags, so this is not like, hey, but way back when. It's like when Ziploc bags came out, my grandma would wash Ziploc bags after they were used.
Well, they're expensive. I mean,
well, they are expensive.
Yeah,
they are.
When you think about it, they are. I mean,
it
for
really
a one-use
is,
time-use thing.
And you throw it away.
Yeah.
It's a smart business model because you're going to go buy more bags because you're taught to throw it away.
bad thing for your wallet.
It is.
Yeah.
And my grandma knew that, and so she would wash plastic bags. And my mom was like so embarrassed by why are you washing plastic bags? But, I took up the challenge of my grandma because when I was in my 20s, I started to travel for business. And so you needed the quart bag to put all your toiletries in when you could travel. And we had, I put all my stuff in, and then it just, I didn't intend to do it, but I kept using the same bag again and again. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to see how long I can make this thing last. And the only reason why I threw it away 15 years later, it just started to smell a little bit funky, But
after 15 years, you just noticed
after 15 years, yeah, it worked, And so, long before everybody was conscious about what's all this plastic doing? We're just throwing it away and stuff like that. My grandma was doing it not because it was the cool thing to do, it's because she didn't want to spend the money on more plastic bags and, use the family budget that way.
Yeah, I think that's a real common theme, especially with people that went through the Depression. My grandparents were both sets of my grandparents were pretty much the same way. They maybe not went to that level of frugalness, for example. They did do things that we thought were kind of crazy at the time. I remember my grandparents, it wasn't even, they always would want to fix something. They would never want to throw anything out. If you could fix it, they would fix it. My mom's dad was really kind of handy. He had a workshop in his basement. He was a really good carpenter and a really good, just like handyman. And he did all sorts of stuff like that. He always fixed things. And my dad's dad, living out in the country, being his own boss, really, he had lots of equipment and implements for logging. He had to learn how to fix all that stuff because you couldn't afford, first of all, to shut down for a whole day so that you could, go to town and get a part and then go talk to somebody how to do it or bring your truck in, to get it fixed. So he learned how to do all that stuff. So for me, he really taught me, and my dad taught me this too growing up, but I think it was imparted on my dad and then and I've spent a lot of time with both sets of grandparents. I think it was imparted on me to try to fix things. That just because something is old or it's broken doesn't mean it's useless. And we should actually look and if maybe even use it for something that it wasn't intended to be used for.
That's true. It was the long before MacGyver was on TV, people were MacGyvering their life,
Exactly.
I think, in general, because you had to.
You have to. It was a necessity.
When I was never the guy that really got into building things like with wood or something like that, and my mom was, and so it was watching that role in around the house. My mom and dad built their house years ago when I was a little guy and stuff, and so I don't have memory of that, but they did when they first got, in the early days of their marriage and stuff, But my mom was actually more handy than my dad in that way, and my dad learned things like he could change oil, he could fix things. But my mom, because she spent all the time with my grandpa, being, again, she was, the youngest of three girls, she learned all of that. And so when people think, well, hey, this is carpenter's work, or this is, back in the day, this is man's work. It's like my mom was doing that and running circles around people just because she knew how to. She would, know how to put something together. And a lot of things I learned from that, I actually learned more from my mom because she learned from her parents about how to do all that stuff. The one thing, too, that was interesting, Josh, is I remember going in my grandpa's garage where he had all of his tools. And I remember seeing saws, like power tools and things like that, that I'm going how old is that thing? And it was heavy, it was built like a tank, and it still ran. It didn't have all the settings. It wasn't like here's my 37 different calibration points for a drill, and this is how I
Right.
do it. It's like
Torque
it's a drill.
or no torque. It's a drill.
Yeah,
It works.
and it drills a hole.
It
And
does
it
what
works.
it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and it's never stopped working for the last 50 years. He had a bandsaw where he had to kind of tape the power cable and stuff like that, and it was a saw, and it worked. And that I always like, why doesn't he get another one? And my mom was like, well, because it still works. Like, why would he need to? And at that age, I didn't quite understand why he wouldn't upgrade. But then I realized, wow, that thing lasted that long. He was familiar with it. He was comfortable with it, and it met the requirement. There wasn't any need to kind of reinvent the drill, because it drilled a hole and it did exactly what it needed to do.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that Brian and I have in common with our grandparents, and that we I think have taken from both sets of them, and we in moving on from this, just kind of this little dissertation about who they were, is that they both sets of them and all of them valued hard work, and they valued it
Yes.
and doing your best, always putting your best foot forward. Don't there aren't very many excuses. If you fail at something, it's okay. Learn from it, move on.
Mm-hmm. The quality of the work especially was something too. Like, you took pride in that because they knew that their name was attached to it. It wasn't like, oh, hey, this is Richard Johnson, and he's just a such and so. Like, he really took pride in the work he did and did it. I remember when he moved closer to where, when I think I was in middle school, when they moved closer to my mom and I and my dad and stuff. And because my grandpa had built houses and built commercial structures and stuff like that, he actually hired somebody to build his home because he wasn't able to do all the work at that age that he was. And I remember it drove him bananas, because he was like, first of all, I mean, he was very opinionated, 100% Swede. So, he had a lot of wherewithal, I'll put it that way, in his life. But he would look at that and go, like, they're taking a shortcut. And he actually spent time going back and fixing things where people took a shortcut because, like, for example, I'm thinking about the roof. And he said, if they just put 2 extra nails, you would never have a shingle blow up. But they were more concerned about the cost of 2 nails over the course of a roof per sheet of shingle versus actually making the roof stay put. So for them, it was like, I just want to get the job done. My grandpa was more like, why don't you spend a little bit extra time to do the job well?
And do the job right so you don't have to redo it, because a lot of that is even true today. If you have to spend half your time redoing someone's work, it's going to take you a long time to get any progress on anything.
Why do things right when you could do things twice?
At twice the price?
Yeah. Twice as nice, the price. Not really. But I think the one thing, too, I think about my grandparents is I saw the example of 2 people that were committed to one another, even when they weren't always in agreement. There's a lot of things, obviously, that my grandparents disagreed on. My wife's family has the record, I think, for the longest in, my extended family through marriage and things like that. Married 73 years. That's a long commitment. And it tells you that they were committed to doing a life together. And it has more to do, sometimes it was as socially acceptable if you were a divorced person or whatever. Definitely not as much back then as it is today, just because of life circumstances and stuff. But the one thing that really made an impact for me is that these 2 people were committed to something through the highs and the lows.
Right.
That's not something that you can take a victory lap on. It's like, hey, you've been married 5 months. Ooh, here we go. This is something like, that outlasted some people's lifespan, and they were still there committed. And they were very much in my wife's life an anchor to be able to go to their home, to know that grandpa and grandma are there. And not everybody's blessed with that particular situation. When Sabrina grew up, she had a little bit different family dynamic where her dad's side of the family was where she would go when she visited her dad, because her mom and dad were divorced. But grandpa and grandma Winter were kind of that symbol and consistency in her life to be able to pull from, and meant something very dear to her.
Yeah, and I think that when you see somebody has, for example, been married that long, or has had a friend that's lasted 50 years or more, that you do realize that it does take work to do that. And that is a good life lesson that I think we can kind of pull into today's society. We're so quick to judge, like, not only people, but if they have a different opinion than us, we're quick to just be like, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you anymore, instead of trying to actually talk to the person, engage the person. And that if somebody has been married that long, or they've lived that long together, they've had different disagreements. Yeah, I mean,
I have.
I know that sometimes when like Brian and I get together, or even when we're just talking on the phone, we have disagreements, but we both respect each other at the same time, so we can talk about it in a civil way. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that whether you're on the internet typing an angry all caps response to somebody or a snarky comment, that maybe we should just kind of like think, how do I really want this to sound? you know?
Yeah. The thing too, nowadays you make a snarky comment online, it will live forever on the internet. It's always there.
Right.
So some of those comments, like obviously people are people all throughout history. So do people have their moments where they said something they shouldn't have said? Absolutely. It's just not recorded in the great interwebs of life where
Yeah.
you can go back
That's
and
why I
look it up.
save all my snarky comments for voice to voice communication. So nothing can be recorded.
I've secretly been making notes for the last 30 years on you, Josh, just to pull out
Yeah, all right, thanks.
at the opportune time,
At least I'll be kept in check. That's for if I
Exactly.
ever run for president. That's what I'm gonna find this. The Josh report is gonna be made
It's
made
gonna come out.
available without redaction.
I will be releasing that report, concurrently with his platform. Say, read the Josh report. The sorry,
That's okay.
sidetrack. The one thing though too, if I go back and look at Josh, because I visited your grandparents' lumber mill when we would in the summer went up to did a camping trip. So we in middle school we went up and kind of explored things around, or that was high school I think, or something
Yeah,
like that.
because we
went
drove up there. So
That's
yeah.
right. I guess you can't drive middle school unless you've had a long tenure throughout.
Yeah.
Anyway, I remember seeing that and seeing how it was established and everything. And I think the thing that has stuck with me when you look at things like farming or lumber, you think like, well, hey, that's like a certain type of profession. Like computer jobs didn't exist then, but people built for the long term, and they were okay that they had to put blood, sweat, and tears and take the risk again and again and again consistently. That's what farmers do every season. They know, like, if they have a bad season, they're going to keep going through. They don't give up on something just because something went exactly wrong. There's a lot of
Right.
wherewithal they had to have, especially living through the economic downturn that they did in, the Depression. So when this generation had the Great Recession and they saw things happening, for us, it was really, for some of us, it was like a really bad situation. And for the people who had lived through it before, they're probably like, oh my gosh, I don't want it to be like it was before. But they had that, they knew how to navigate it if they had to. They knew how to adjust their life accordingly if they needed to kind of make those hard decisions.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of wraps up our conversation pretty well. I want to kind of want to challenge people, like, what kind of wise words do you have from your grandparents or from somebody significant in your life when you were younger that are kind of still big in your ears? How are you applying that now?
About people in your life now, it's like, are you allowing people who are older than you to speak into your life? That's an important thing. They're going to have a perspective that you don't have. And I find also, too, as people get older, too, they've also learned in many ways to listen well, because they've also know that the further they go along, the less that they actually know. They've learned more, but they also understand the world of things they don't know. And so I encourage you to go find a cup of coffee with either a grandparent or somebody else who's in that role and just listen to them well, because I think that there's some wisdom that we can apply today. With all that being said, thank you for listening today. And until next time, this is Brian.
And this is Josh.
For Curiosity Continuum.